When the workers went to the field to address this situation, carrying cement truck after cement truck to pour around this reactor, they said that as they were nearing the site, that their vocal cords would begin tightening, being damaged by the radiation. The trucks would stop in the road because the asphalt had turned to liquid. The ground around there was so hot. Plants would spontaneously catch on fire. There was so much radiation saturating the air. And all of this radiation in a cloud of fallout affected hundreds of thousands of people. There were many cases of cancer, and people in the neighboring countries, many of them had to suffer having children with very bizarre and disturbing birth defects. But Jesus and his believers, you and I, face a far more serious life or death situation. A bigger cover-up than what happened in the Soviet Union is taking place right now. When Israel learned the true character of God, happened to be when Jesus died on the cross. They found out that God wasn't mean. The gospel was attacked everywhere. And finally, the cover-up caught on in Rome. It was the first city. In Rome, there was a pagan city before. These new baby Christians came in as missionaries to come and start sharing the gospel. And it didn't take very long before they were corrupted. The sun was universally celebrated. This is a quote from Edward Gibbon. Universally celebrated as the invincible guide and protector of Constantine. That is the sun in the sky. Sun worship was how they did things in this part of Europe. Constantine even printed coins which bore on one side the letters of the name of Christ, and the other side the figure of the sun god. This was a guy who was trying to walk on the top of a fence. And he didn't want all of God, and he kind of wanted to keep his hold on this pagan way of doing things. Socrates Scholasticus, a very well-respected historian, puts it this way. For although all the churches throughout Europe celebrate the sacred mysteries, which is the communion with God, on the Sabbath of every week, yet the Christians of Alexandria and at Rome, Alexandria caught on next, and at Rome, on account of some ancient tradition, have ceased to do this. It's one of the first things to go, as people were baptizing pagans and bringing out wet pagans. One of the first things to go was the Sabbath, and they returned to their venerable day of the sun. So we see a grotesque blindfold tightly tied over the eyes of the baby Christians in Rome. Their vision of the living God turned to appeasement. The truth of the Sabbath as the day of rejuvenation, an oasis of rest with, there's a typo, sorry, an oasis of rest with our Creator, melded with the pagan view of a day to appease their sun god, and the venerable day of the sun is now called Sunday. So they abandoned this Sabbath that they had been observing in order to compromise and become one with the pagan community so that they could have this new religion, Christian paganism. The result of the melding was bowing to a God who changes his mind. Remember, the Ten Commandments were written in stone, and they're abandoning some of them. Changes his mind, who threatens horrible torture, just like the pagan gods did, whose love is conditional and who forces us to love him or else. Is this really God? Is this really the God that we want to get to know? Is this really the God of the Bible? The process of distorting the appearance of God's character is vicious, and it is relentless. Satan does not lose steam. He doesn't get tired. He doesn't have to sleep, I don't think. I don't know. The Bible doesn't say Satan has to sleep. I don't know. But Satan still has a firm grip on the minds of the Romans. Not every Roman, not everybody who lives in Rome does Satan work with. But I'm making the claim right now that Rome has got an issue with being lied to. And the poor guys are believing a lot of them. Imagine how disappointed the reformers would be if they saw the churches today. Martin Luther spent a lot of time and a lot of persecution. He was persecuted heavily because he wanted to uncover what had been covered, the gospel, the good news that you don't have to earn your way into heaven. Instead, you can say, God, I accept your gift of eternal life, and you'll get into heaven. He wanted to uncover that because it had been covered up here in Rome. Here's a few of Satan's landmines. These are other ones that he's distributed over the world. These aren't all of them. It'd be difficult to list all of them, and some of them would be too naughty to put up on the screen. Naturalism and determinism and pantheism. Remember, these are some of the worldviews that we talked in Lecture 2 about. And appeasement. The appeasement worldview is one where you have to please God by saying repetitious prayers or some. The Opus Dei whip themselves, and you might have seen in the Da Vinci Code, the movie, or read about it in the book, they tie like this wire thing around their leg and enjoy the constant torture because they know that it will probably get them into heaven. Naturalism is a lack of belief that God exists. Determinism is preached more and more popularly around the United States. That's the idea that God causes everything to happen. Even the bad decisions that you make were God's decisions, so it's not really an issue that you made them. Pantheism, the belief that we're going to be like God, one of Satan's original lies. Selfishness and greed and sexual perversion, the dead speaking to us. Materialism, that is keeping our eyes on material things and making that kind of the center of our life. Amusement. The word amusement has the prefix a, muse, and then the suffix ment. A means not, muse means to think, and ment means is what you're doing, basically. So amusement is to stop thinking. When you are amused, you've engaged in an activity that causes you to just be like, and you're not thinking, you're not contemplating. And the saying that an idle mind is the devil's playground is a true saying. And when you are not thinking, it's a good place for him to plant lies and things, because nothing else is happening there. If God loved us, wouldn't he give to us a map of these deadly minefields? If he could see the future, wouldn't he show us how to live with discernment for truth and error? Wouldn't God do that if he loved us? If he can actually see the future, if he is who he says he is, then wouldn't God tell us about these nasty things that we could step on and have our leg blown off? Yes, he would. Jesus put a thorough map of Satan's war plans into our hands, also known as prophecies. Jesus also shows us the keys needed to unlock the safes that they rest in, and these are the parables and symbols of the prophecies. They're kept safe. Safes are things like parables, like allegories, symbols, and metaphor. Think about this for a second. In Matthew 3:10, the disciples came to him and asked, "Why do you speak to the people in parables?" He replied, "The knowledge of the secrets of the kingdom of heaven has been given to you, but not to them." If you yourself were a national intelligence agent, would you send secret orders to soldiers over the wires without encryption? Would you want your enemy to be able to read your best war plans? There's a reason, a fantastically good reason, that God uses parables so frequently. In 1 Corinthians 2:14, we read, "The man without the Spirit," this is how we ourselves, as Christians, are able to understand these parables and symbols, apocalyptic language, that sort of thing. "The man without the Spirit does not accept the things that come from the Spirit of God, for their foolishness to him, and he can't understand them because they're spiritually discerned." If you aren't living with God, if you don't want his will, then he's not going to be able to teach you what these symbols in the Bible mean because you don't want to hear it. Here's an example of a locked parable. This is from Revelation. "Then the dragon was enraged at the woman and went off to make war against the rest of her offspring, those who obey God's commandments and hold on to the testimony of Jesus." Not all of it is locked, but some of them, when I read Revelation when I was 10, I was like,